The sun hung like a burning coal in the merciless sky, its heat pressing down upon the endless expanse of scorched grassland that stretched toward the gray mountains. The wind carried nothing but dust and the memory of rain that hadn't fallen in months. This was the territory west of the Missouri, where civilization thinned out like morning mist and only the stubborn or the desperate remained. Eliza May Carter pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders. Though it offered no protection from the heat, her dress, once a respectable navy blue, had faded to the color of old dishwater, torn at the hem from countless miles of walking. She paused at the crest of a small rise, her breath coming in short gasps as she scanned the horizon behind her. Nothing moved in the shimmering heat except the occasional tumbleweed, but she knew they were back there somewhere. The men her late husband's creditors had sent after her. 6 months. Thomas had been dead 6 months, and still they hounded her for debts she'd known nothing about until after they'd lowered his pine box into the ground. The general store owner, the saloon keeper, even the church. They'd all come calling with ledgers and IOUs bearing her husband's shaky signature. When she'd sold everything, the small house, the furniture her mother had left her, even Thomas's pocket watch, it still wasn't enough. They wanted more than money now. They wanted to make an example of her. Her cracked lips tasted of alkali dust as she forced herself to keep moving. The soles of her boots, worn paper-thin, offered little protection from the burning earth. Each step sent small clouds of red dust swirling around her ankles. She'd left the last town, if you could call that collection of sun-baked buildings a town, 3 days ago, carrying only a canvas bag with the last of her provisions, a handful of hardtack, a nearly empty water skin, and the small derringer her father had given her on her wedding day. For protection, he'd said then, pressing the pearl-handled pistol into her palm. She'd laughed, thinking she'd never need such a thing in the civilized town of Silver Creek. But Silver Creek was far behind her now, along with any pretense of civilization. The land here was brutal in its honesty. It didn't care about a woman's tears or a widow's plight. It simply was. Vast and unforgiving. Beautiful in its terrible indifference, the buffalo grass, once green and lush, now crackled beneath her feet like old bones. In the distance, a line of cottonwoods marked what might be a creek, though whether it held water this late in the season was anyone's guess. Eliza had learned to read the signs of this harsh country in the weeks since she'd fled. The way hawks circled meant death somewhere below. The behavior of prairie dogs could warn of approaching storms, and the dust clouds on the horizon, those could mean wild horses, or buffalo, or men on horseback riding hard with collection notices and rope. She'd seen what they did to Ed Morrison's widow just 2 months past. The woman had tried to run too, loaded her children into a wagon and headed east. They'd brought her back, made her work in the saloon until she'd paid off every cent, serving drinks to the same men who'd seized her home. Eliza had watched from her window as they'd paraded the woman through town, and she'd known then that she'd rather die in the wilderness than suffer such humiliation. The sun was sliding toward the western mountains now, painting their granite faces the color of dried blood. She needed shelter for the night, somewhere defensible. Out here, the dangers multiplied after dark. Wolves, coyotes, and worse, men who'd lost whatever decency they'd once possessed, who prowled the frontier like predators seeking the weak and alone. A shallow ravine opened to her left, carved by some long-ago flood. Scrub oak and sage grew along its edges, offering at least the illusion of concealment. Eliza half climbed, half slid down the crumbling bank, her skirts catching on the thorny mesquite. At the bottom, she found a small overhang in the bank, just large enough to shelter one person. It would have to do. As darkness crept across the land like spilled ink, she huddled in her makeshift shelter, the derringer heavy in her lap. The temperature plummeted as it always did in the high desert, and she shivered despite the small fire she dared to build. The smoke might give away her position, but freezing to death seemed the more immediate threat. Somewhere in the darkness, a wolf howled, long and mournful. Others answered, their voices weaving together in a symphony that spoke of ancient freedoms and savage necessities. Eliza pulled her knees to her chest, making herself small. She thought of her sister back in Philadelphia, safe in her tidy row house with gas lamps and proper streets. Martha had written, begging her to come east after Thomas died. But the shame had been too great, the weight of failure too heavy. How could she arrive on her sister's doorstep like a beggar, bringing scandal and debt collectors to that respectable address? No, she'd chosen this instead, the vast anonymity of the frontier, where a woman might disappear entirely, might become someone new if she survived long enough. There were mining camps in the mountains. She'd heard rough places where no one asked too many questions. If she could reach one, perhaps she could work, cooking, washing, anything honest that would keep her free. The fire died to embers, and still she sat wakeful, watching the stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance. Out here, they seemed close enough to touch, so bright they cast shadows. She'd never seen stars like this in Silver Creek, where lamplight and wood smoke dimmed their glory. It was one small compensation for everything she'd lost. This glimpse of infinity, this reminder that her troubles were but a speck in the grand design. A rustling in the brush snapped her to attention. Her hand tightened on the derringer as she strained to see beyond the dying fire's glow. It came again, deliberate, too heavy for a rabbit or prairie dog. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she thumbed back the hammer. The click, abnormally loud in the stillness. "Easy there," a voice drawled from the darkness. "Just a traveler seeking the fire's warmth." But Eliza knew better than to trust voices in the night. She'd learned that lesson from Thomas, who'd smiled and promised while he gambled away their future in back rooms she'd never known existed. "Stay back," she called, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "I'm armed and know how to use it." A low chuckle answered her. "I don't doubt it, ma'am. The desert teaches harsh lessons to those who don't learn quick." She kept the derringer trained on the darkness, though her hand trembled now from cold and fear. Somewhere above, an owl called, its voice like a lost soul seeking home. The wind picked up, driving sand against the ravine walls with a sound like whispered secrets. This was her life now, nights of vigilance, days of flight, the constant weight of being hunted. But as she sat there in her small shelter, weapon in hand, Eliza felt something she hadn't expected, a fierce, wild freedom. She was no longer the shopkeeper's wife, defined by her husband's failures. She was simply herself, alone under the vast sky, making choices that were entirely her own. The rustling faded as her mysterious visitor moved on, seeking easier prey, perhaps. Eliza kept watch until the eastern sky began to lighten, painting the world in shades of pearl and rose. Another night survived, another day to face. She rose stiffly, scattered the ashes of her fire, and prepared to walk again toward whatever fate awaited her in this beautiful, terrible land. The town of Dust Bowl Junction appeared on the horizon like a mirage, its weathered buildings huddled against the endless prairie, as if seeking protection from the vastness. Eliza paused at the outskirts, her hand reflexively checking the few coins left in her pocket. 3 days of walking had brought her here, to this collection of sun-bleached wood and broken dreams that passed for civilization in the territories. Main Street was little more than a wide dirt path, rutted from wagon wheels and baked hard as stone. False-fronted buildings lined both sides. Garrison's General Store, the Broken Spoke Saloon, Mrs. Pritchard's boarding house, and a handful of other establishments that seemed to lean on each other for support. Red dust coated everything like a second skin, giving the whole town a rusty, dried blood appearance in the afternoon sun. Eliza straightened her shoulders and walked down the street, aware of the eyes that followed her progress. A woman alone was always cause for speculation, but a woman alone in torn clothes, covered in trail dust, was something else entirely. She could feel the weight of their judgment, see it in the way the proper ladies pulled their skirts aside as she passed. The general store seemed the safest option. She pushed open the door, a bell jangling overhead, and stepped into the relative coolness of the interior. The smell hit her immediately. Leather and tobacco, coffee and kerosene, the peculiar mixture that marked such establishments throughout the frontier. "Help you?" The voice belonged to a thin man with suspicious eyes who stood behind the counter like a guard at his post. His gaze took in her appearance in one swift sweep, and she saw his mouth tighten with disapproval. "I'm looking for work," Eliza said, lifting her chin. "I can read and write, do figures, I've run a household, know how to keep books." "Don't need any help," he cut her off. "Especially not from—" He paused, his eyes narrowing. "You're not from around here?" "No, sir. I'm from Silver Creek, but—" Silver Creek. A woman emerged from behind a shelf of canned goods, her face pinched with curiosity and something less pleasant. "Wasn't there some scandal there? A suicide? Deaths?" Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks. News traveled fast along the frontier, carried by drummers and drifters like seeds on the wind. "My husband died," she said quietly. "But he didn't. It was illness that took him." The woman sniffed, unconvinced. "And you're here alone, no family, no connections." Each question was weighted with implication. "I'm seeking honest work, nothing more." The shopkeeper shook his head. "Try somewhere else. We run a respectable establishment." Eliza turned to leave, but the woman's voice followed her. "You might try the saloon. They're always looking for help." The derision in her tone was unmistakable. Eliza fled the store, the bell's cheerful jangle mocking her departure. Outside, the sun seemed even harsher, the dust thicker. She tried the hotel next, then the restaurant, but the story was the same. Her appearance, her circumstances, her very existence as an unattached woman marked her as unsuitable, suspicious, unwanted. At the boarding house, Mrs. Pritchard, a woman with steel-gray hair and a face like dried apple, looked her up and down with calculating eyes. "I might have work," she said slowly. "Cleaning, laundry. But I don't take in strays. You'd need to clean yourself up first, and I'd need references. Good references from decent people." "I could work for room and board initially," Eliza offered desperately. "Until I've proven myself." Looking like that, Mrs. Pritchard's laugh was harsh as lye soap. "I'd lose every respectable boarder I have. No, girl, you're too much of a risk. Try your luck elsewhere." The afternoon wore on, each rejection adding another stone to the weight in Eliza's chest. The Broken Spoke Saloon loomed at the end of the street, its bat-wing doors swinging occasionally to reveal glimpses of the dim interior. She knew what kind of work they'd offer her there. Had seen the painted women who worked such establishments, their bright dresses and dead eyes telling their own stories of dreams abandoned. She was standing in the shadow of the livery stable, gathering courage for one more attempt, when she heard the voices. "That's her, I'm sure of it. The Carter woman from Silver Creek." Eliza pressed herself against the rough boards, her heart racing. Through a gap in the planks, she could see two men in trail-worn clothes, the kind of hard-faced individuals who made their living tracking human prey. "Bill said she'd headed west. Description matches. Young widow, dark hair, traveling alone. Worth checking. Even if it ain't her, a woman alone." The man's laugh made Eliza's skin crawl. Might be profitable either way. They moved off toward the saloon, and Eliza knew her time in Dust Bowl Junction was over before it had begun. She slipped around the back of the livery, past the corral where horses dozed in the heat, and headed for the far edge of town. Behind the last buildings, the prairie resumed its endless dominion, offering escape and danger in equal measure. As she hurried through the scattered shanties that marked the town's ragged edge, an old Mexican woman sitting in a doorway caught her eye. The woman gestured her over, pressing something into Eliza's hand, a piece of flatbread wrapped in cloth. "Vaya con Dios," the woman murmured, her wrinkled face kind. "The desert is cruel, but sometimes kinder than men." Eliza's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. She squeezed the woman's hand in thanks before continuing her flight. Behind her, she could hear voices raised in the street, questions being asked. They discovered her presence, would soon pick up her trail. The land beyond town was rougher, cut by arroyos and studded with ocotillo and cholla. Eliza moved as quickly as she dared, aware that her passage left signs for those who knew how to read them. The sun was descending toward the horizon, painting the landscape in shades of orange and purple. Soon it would be dark, and she'd be alone again in the vast emptiness. A sound made her freeze. Hoofbeats. Coming fast from the direction of town. She scrambled down into a dry wash, pressing herself against the eroded bank. The horses passed close enough that she could hear the creak of saddle leather, the men's voices carrying on the still air. Heading for the mountains? Likely. Woman on foot can't have gotten far. Check that wash up ahead. I'll circle around. Eliza held her breath, one hand on the derringer. If they found her, but the hoofbeats moved on, the voices fading. She waited until full darkness before emerging, then continued her flight by starlight, stumbling over rocks and scratching herself on unseen thorns. The night stretched endless, each sound a potential threat. Coyotes yipped in the distance, and once she heard the deeper cough of what might have been a mountain lion. But she pressed on, driven by the greater fear of what pursued her. When dawn finally came, she was miles from town, in country that seemed even more desolate than what she'd crossed before. Red rocks rose like ancient ruins from the desert floor, and distant mesas offered the promise of shelter if she could reach them. She was down to her last mouthful of water, her feet bleeding inside her worn boots, but she was still free. Behind her, a dust cloud marked riders on her trail, still distant but inexorable. Eliza forced herself to move faster, seeking the broken country ahead where a person on foot might lose mounted pursuers. The sun climbed higher, its heat a physical weight pressing down on her. She thought of the women in town, safe in their respectable homes, their greatest worry what to serve for supper or which dress to wear to church. They'd looked at her with such disdain, as if poverty and misfortune were contagious diseases. But now, fleeing across this merciless landscape, Eliza felt a fierce pride. She might die out here, but she'd die free, unbowed by their judgment or their narrow definitions of propriety. The storm, when it came, arrived with little warning. The western sky darkened as if God had drawn a curtain across the sun, and the wind picked up, driving sand before it in stinging clouds. Eliza had heard of such storms, how they could strip flesh from bone, how travelers caught in them sometimes wandered in circles until they dropped. She sought shelter among the rocks, pulling her shawl over her head as the world disappeared in a howling wall of sand and wind. This was nature's fury, impersonal and absolute, and all she could do was make herself small and endure. The storm would hide her tracks. She realized, if she survived it, she might finally escape her pursuers. It was a grim sort of hope, but in this hard land, you took whatever hope was offered. The sand scoured everything, turning the world into a howling brown void where earth and sky merged into one terrible force. Eliza pressed herself deeper into the rocky crevice, her shawl pulled tight over her face, breathing through the fabric as the storm raged. Time lost meaning in that chaos of wind and grit. It might have been minutes or hours that she huddled there, praying to survive nature's wrath. Then, through the roar of the storm, she heard something else, a voice, barely audible above the wind, a human voice, calling out. Her first instinct was to shrink deeper into hiding, but something in that voice spoke of distress rather than pursuit. It came again, closer now, and she could make out words. "Anyone there? Hello?" A shape materialized from the storm, a tall figure leading a horse, both man and beast heads down against the wind. He stumbled past her hiding spot, would have continued on, but his horse balked, ears pinned back, refusing to move. The man looked around, squinting through the flying sand, and his gaze found her. "Ma'am?" He had to shout to be heard. "We need better shelter. I know a place. Not far." Eliza hesitated. Trust was a luxury she could no longer afford, but staying here meant certain death as the storm intensified. The stranger didn't wait for her answer. He grabbed her arm, not roughly, but with urgent purpose, and pulled her from the rocks. "Can you ride?" he yelled. She nodded, and he boosted her onto the horse before swinging up behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, and she was suddenly aware of the solid warmth of another human being, the first real contact she'd had in weeks. The horse pushed forward into the storm, the man guiding it with sure knowledge of the terrain. They rode blind through the tempest until suddenly they were descending, the wind's fury lessening as they dropped into what must have been a canyon. The man dismounted, leading the horse down a treacherous path that Eliza could barely see. Then, miracle of miracles, they were ducking into a cave. No, a proper wooden structure built against the canyon wall. A shepherd's shelter or line shack. Inside. The blessed silence after the storm's rage made her ears ring. The man quickly shut the door and lit a lantern, revealing a single room with rough furniture, a table, 2 chairs, a narrow bunk, and most wonderful of all, a small stove. "We'll wait it out here," he said, his voice normal now, deep and measured. "These storms can last hours." In the lantern light, Eliza got her first real look at her rescuer. He was perhaps 35, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of solid build that came from hard work rather than mere size. His face was weathered brown by sun and wind, with lines around green eyes that spoke of someone who'd learned to squint against harsh light. Dark hair, touched with premature gray at the temples, hung past his collar. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowhand-worn denim, leather vest, sturdy boots, but something in his bearing suggested he hadn't always been such. "Name's Caleb Morrison," he said, removing his hat and beating the dust from it. "Sorry for the rough handling back there, but that storm wasn't playing." "Eliza Carter," she replied, then wondered if she should have given a false name. But the truth had slipped out, perhaps because she was too exhausted for deception. He studied her with those keen eyes, taking in her torn dress, her dust-caked appearance, the way she held herself ready to flee. "You're a long way from anywhere, Mrs. Carter." "I could say the same of you." A slight smile touched his lips. "Fair enough. I've got a small spread about 2 miles north. Was checking on some cattle when the storm hit." He moved to the stove, opening it to reveal wood already laid for a fire. "You hungry? I've got some provisions in my saddlebags." Eliza's stomach answered before she could, growling loudly in the quiet shelter. When had she last eaten? The bread the Mexican woman had given her was long gone. Caleb lit the fire without comment, then retrieved his saddlebags. Soon, the smell of coffee filled the small space, along with beans warming in a pot. He moved with economical grace, comfortable with the simple domestic tasks. It made her wonder about his story. A man alone, tending his own needs. "The storm will cover your tracks," he said conversationally, not looking at her. "Whoever was following you will have a hard time picking up the trail." She stiffened. "What makes you think? A woman alone in this country, looking over her shoulder, hiding in the rocks?" He shrugged. "Doesn't take a genius. Though I'm guessing it's not the law you're running from. You don't have that kind of look." "And what kind of look is that?" "Desperate, mean. Folks running from the law get a certain hardness to them. You're scared, but not guilty scared. More like," he paused, considering, "hunted scared." His perception unnerved her, but also, strangely, comforted her. Here was someone who understood without her having to explain, who accepted the situation without demanding details. They ate in companionable silence, the simple meal tasting like a feast to her starved body. The coffee was strong enough to float a horseshoe, but it warmed her from the inside out. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the canyon walls. "You can't keep running like this," Caleb said finally. "Not alone. This country will kill you sure as any bullet. I don't have much choice." "There's always choices. Maybe not good ones, but choices all the same." He refilled her coffee cup. "What kind of trouble are you in?" Eliza found herself telling him. Not everything, but enough. About Thomas's debts, the creditors who wanted to make an example of her, her flight from Silver Creek. He listened without interrupting, his expression giving away little. "So they want money you don't have," he summarized when she finished. "Or they want to use you to show others what happens to those who can't pay. Either way, you're right. Going back isn't an option." "I thought I could disappear out here, find work in a mining camp, maybe, or Mining camps are rough places for a woman alone. Rougher than whatever you're running from, most likely. He stood, walked to the small window, and peered out at the storm. You know anything about cattle? Horses? I kept house, managed accounts. I'm not afraid of hard work. That's not what I asked. She bristled at his tone. I can learn. I've already learned to survive out here. Haven't I? He turned back to her, and she thought she saw approval in his eyes. That you have, though barely, from the looks of it. The lantern flickered, casting dancing shadows on the rough walls. Outside, the wind seemed to be lessening, though sand still rattled against the window. I could use help at my place, Caleb said slowly, as if thinking aloud. It's not much, a half-built ranch house, a corral, some cattle that are more trouble than they're worth. But it's 15 miles from the nearest town, and folks there mind their own business. You could work for room and board until you figure out what comes next. Eliza's first instinct was suspicion. Men didn't offer help without expecting something in return. What would you want from me? His expression hardened slightly. I just told you, work, cooking, help with the accounts if you're good with numbers. Maybe learn to help with the stock. I'm not looking for anything else, if that's what you're thinking. Heat flooded her cheeks. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. And you were right to. His voice gentled. You don't know me, and trust is dangerous out here. But I'll tell you plain, I've got my own reasons for keeping to myself, and they don't include taking advantage of desperate women. Something in his tone suggested a story there, perhaps as painful as her own. She studied his face in the lamplight, trying to read the truth there. He met her gaze steadily, patient under her scrutiny. Why? She asked finally. Why help me? He was quiet for a long moment. Maybe because I know what it's like to have the world turn against you. Maybe because I'm tired of eating my own cooking. Or maybe because when I saw you hiding in those rocks, ready to face down a sandstorm rather than go back to whatever was behind you, I saw something I recognized. What was that? Someone who'd rather die free than live caged. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Outside, the storm was definitely weakening, the howl diminishing to a moan. I don't even know you, Eliza said softly. No, you don't, but you knew those folks in town. And how'd that work out? He moved back to the table, sat down across from her. I'm not saying trust me. I'm saying consider your options. You can leave when the storm passes. Take your chances alone. Or you can come with me. Work honest work for honest shelter. And maybe buy yourself time to make a real plan. She thought of the riders hunting her, of the hostile faces in Dust Bowl Junction, of the endless miles of unforgiving country. Then she looked at this stranger who'd pulled her from the storm, who offered her coffee and straight talk instead of judgment or false promises. All right, she heard herself say, but I keep my gun, and I leave when I choose. A real smile crossed his face then, transforming the harsh plains into something almost handsome. Wouldn't have it any other way. A person who gives up their gun out here is a fool, and I don't make deals with fools. The storm was breaking up, late afternoon light beginning to filter through the thinning dust. Soon they would leave this small shelter, and she would be trusting her life to another stranger's promises. But somehow, this felt different from all the other chances she'd taken. Maybe it was his matter-of-fact acceptance of her situation, or the way he'd offered help without making her beg for it. Or maybe she was just too tired to run anymore, at least for a while. The land emerged from the storm transformed, red earth now sculpted into new patterns by the wind's violent hand. They rode double on Caleb's bay gelding, picking their way carefully through arroyos filled with fresh sand drifts. Eliza had never ridden astride before. Propriety in Silver Creek demanded side saddle, but propriety seemed a distant concern now. She tried not to think about the solid presence at her back, the way Caleb's arms enclosed her as he handled the reins. That's Cathedral Rock, he said, pointing to a massive sandstone formation that rose from the desert floor like a Gothic spire. When you see that, you know you're in my territory. Not that I own it all, but my claim runs from there to those purple hills west. The landscape was different here. Still harsh, but with a raw beauty that caught at something in Eliza's chest. Mesas layered in shades of rust and gold caught the late afternoon light, while distant mountains wore shadows like royal purple cloaks. A hawk circled overhead, its cry piercing the clear air. "There," Caleb said, and she saw it, a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley where cottonwood suggested water. It wasn't much, a half-finished adobe house, a barn that had seen better days, a corral with a few horses, and what looked like the beginning of a second outbuilding. As they descended into the valley, Eliza felt her anxiety rise. She was putting herself in this stranger's power, miles from any help if she'd misjudged him. Her hand moved instinctively to the derringer in her pocket. "Your gun's your business," Caleb said quietly, apparently sensing her movement. "But you might want to know there's a loaded Winchester by the door, a Colt in the kitchen drawer, and another rifle in the barn. If I meant you harm, I wouldn't tell you where the weapons are." It was sound logic, though Eliza kept her hand near the derringer anyway. The ranch, if it could be called that, showed signs of hard work and harder dreams. The main house was well built as far as it went, with thick adobe walls and a proper roof, but only half finished. The completed portion included a main room with a fireplace, a kitchen area, and what looked like one bedroom beyond. Tools and building materials suggested ongoing construction. Caleb dismounted first, then helped her down. "It's not much," he said, a note of something like embarrassment in his voice. "Been working on it for 2 years now, but building alone is slow work." "You have no help?" "Had a partner when I started. He decided California gold was more promising than New Mexico cattle." There was more to that story. She sensed, but he didn't elaborate. Inside, the house was surprisingly neat for a bachelor's dwelling. The furniture was rough but well made, the floor swept clean, dishes washed and stacked on simple shelves. A rifle did indeed rest on pegs by the door, and the promised Colt was visible through a partially open drawer. "You can have the bedroom," Caleb said. "I'll bunk in here by the fire. There's a bar for the bedroom door if you want it." The matter-of-fact way he addressed her fears continued to surprise her. Most men would have been offended at the implication, or would have made elaborate protestations of their honor. Caleb simply acknowledged the reality of her situation. "I'll need to see to the stock," he continued. "Storm probably scattered them some. You'll find food in the pantry. Pump out back for water. Well's good even in dry years." He left her then, and Eliza stood alone in the strange house, trying to orient herself to this sudden change in circumstances. She explored cautiously, finding the promised pantry stocked with beans, flour, dried meat, preserves, and other frontier staples. The bedroom was sparse but clean, with a proper bed, a trunk, and pegs for clothing. Through the window, she watched Caleb work, noting the easy way he handled the horses, the patience with which he checked each animal for storm damage. Whatever else he was, he knew his business. By the time he returned, she had water heating and was mixing biscuit dough, falling back on familiar tasks to steady her nerves. He paused in the doorway, seeming surprised. "You don't have to start tonight. You've been through enough." "I'd rather be doing something," she admitted. "Idle hands leave too much room for thinking." He nodded as if he understood that all too well. While she cooked, he cleaned his rifle, the commonplace domesticity of the scene at odds with the strangeness of their situation. Over dinner beans, biscuits, and dried apple pie she'd improvised from his stores, they established the parameters of their arrangement. She would cook, keep house, help with whatever tasks she could learn. In return, shelter, food, and protection from pursuit. "Can you read and cipher?" he asked. "Yes, I kept the books for my husband's shop." The words brought a bitter taste. Those same books had hidden the debts that destroyed her life. "Good. I've been trying to keep track of the cattle, expenses, but paperwork's not my strong suit." Later, as darkness settled over the valley, they sat by the fire, the silence comfortable rather than awkward. Eliza found herself stealing glances at him, trying to piece together his story. His hands were calloused from work, but he held his coffee cup with an oddly refined grip. His speech shifted between educated and frontier casual, as if he, too, were playing a role he hadn't quite mastered. "You were a soldier," she said suddenly, surprising herself. He looked up sharply. "What makes you say that?" "The way you stand, how you checked the perimeter when we arrived, the systematic way you cleaned your rifle." A slow smile crossed his face. "Observant. Yes, I was cavalry. 5 years, mostly fighting Indians in Texas." The smile faded. "Not work I'm proud of now." "Is that why you're here? Hiding from something you did?" "In a way." He stared into the fire. "More hiding from what I wouldn't do. Orders I couldn't follow. Men I couldn't become." He shook his head. "But that's old history." They prepared for sleep with a careful choreography of strangers sharing space. Eliza barred her door as he'd suggested, then lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling, the distant howl of coyotes, the wind in the cottonwoods. Morning came with a symphony of new sounds, horses nickering, birds calling, the crow of a rooster she hadn't noticed the night before. When she emerged, Caleb had coffee ready and was frying bacon. "Thought I'd show you around today," he said. "If you're staying, you need to know the land, where water is, where to go if there's trouble." They spent the morning on horseback. He'd saddled a gentle mare for her, riding the boundaries of his claim. He showed her the spring that fed the creek, the box canyon where horses could be penned in emergency, the high ground with good sight lines in all directions. "Raiders come through sometimes," he explained. "Apache, mostly, though they've been quieter lately. Banditos from across the border. Regular outlaws, too. This country attracts people who don't want to be found." "Like us," Eliza said quietly. "Like us." He agreed. The days began to take on rhythm. Morning chores, afternoon work on the house or with the cattle, evenings by the fire. Eliza learned to ride properly, to tell a steer from a heifer, to read the weather and cloud formations. Her hands roughened, her skin darkened. Muscles appeared where softness had been. Caleb was a patient teacher, never mocking her ignorance or growing frustrated with her mistakes. In turn, she brought order to his haphazard bookkeeping, improved his basic meals, and created small comforts in the stark house curtains from old flour sacks, a rag rug by the hearth. One evening, as she worked on mending while he oiled leather tack, she realized she hadn't thought about Silver Creek all day. The realization brought both relief and a strange melancholy. "You never ask about before," she said. He looked up from his work. "Figure you'll tell me what you want me to know. Rest isn't my business." Most people would be curious." "I'm not most people." He paused. "Are you asking me to ask?" She considered this. "Maybe I'm asking why you don't." "Because everybody's running from something out here. Some from the law, some from themselves, some from memories that won't let go. Asking questions just stirs up mud that's better left settled. Is that what you're doing? Letting mud settle?" "Something like that." He returned to his work, but added, "Though having company helps, being alone with your thoughts too long makes them echo." It was the closest he'd come to expressing any feeling about her presence beyond practical appreciation for her work. Eliza felt an unexpected warmth at the admission. That night, she heard him moving restlessly in the main room, the floor creaking under his weight. She wondered what memories kept him wakeful, what echoes disturbed his peace. In her own bed, she thought about trust, about the strange security she felt in this unfinished house with a man she barely knew. The next morning brought riders on the horizon, and her newfound peace shattered like glass. The riders turned out to be neighbors, the Hawthorne brothers from the spread to the south, checking on stock after the storm. But the scare had reminded Eliza how precarious her safety was. She threw herself into work with renewed purpose, as if staying busy could keep danger at bay. Days melded into weeks as spring warmed toward summer. The half-built ranch began to feel less like a hiding place and more like something that might, impossibly, become home. She learned to milk the 2 dairy cows Caleb had acquired, to gather eggs from the temperamental hens, to spot a lame horse from across the corral. The house grew under their combined efforts. Caleb would frame new rooms while she chinked walls with adobe mud. Her dress kilted up scandalously. Sleeves rolled past her elbows. They worked in companionable silence mostly. But sometimes he would tell stories of his cavalry days, carefully edited. She sensed to leave out the worst parts. "There was this Sergeant O'Malley," he said one afternoon as they repaired the chicken coop. "Irish as they come. Could curse for 10 minutes straight without repeating himself. Had a way with horses that was pure magic. Could calm a spooked mount with just his voice." "What happened to him?" Caleb's hand stilled on the wire. "Died at Washita River. Custer's winter campaign." His voice turned bitter. "Glorious victory. I called it something else." She waited, sensing more coming. "Women and children in that village. Old men, not just warriors." He went back to work with sharp, angry movements. "I transferred out after that. Couldn't stomach it anymore." Eliza thought of her own flight from civilization's cruelties. Sometimes leaving is the only honorable choice. He glanced at her, something grateful in his expression. Not everyone sees it that way. That evening, as they sat on the rough porch he'd built, watching sunset paint the mountains crimson, the moment came that she'd both dreaded and anticipated. The work was done for the day. Supper dishes washed, and in the quiet twilight, barriers seemed less solid. "I should heat some water," she said suddenly. "For washing, I must look a fright." "You look fine," Caleb said absently, then seemed to realize what he'd said. In the gathering dusk, she couldn't see if he was blushing, but his sudden attention to rolling a cigarette suggested embarrassment. "I haven't had a proper bath since," she tried to calculate. "Since I left Silver Creek. Washing from a basin isn't the same. There's a tub in the storeroom. Big one. I could set it up in the kitchen. Heat water." That would be wonderful, she wanted to say, but settled for very kind. It took time to heat enough water, carrying buckets from the pump, warming them on the stove. Caleb dragged the copper tub into the kitchen and then made himself scarce, mumbling about checking the horses. Eliza barred the door and windows, then sank into the blessed hot water with a sigh that was almost a sob. She soaked until the water cooled, scrubbing away weeks of dust and fear and flight. Her hair, finally clean, felt like silk between her fingers. For these few moments, she could pretend she was back in her old life, safe in her own home, tomorrow predictable and unthreatening. But that life was gone, and, surprisingly, the thought brought less pain than before. That woman had been comfortable but caged, defined by her role as wife to a man who'd lied with every smile. This woman, brown from sun, hands rough from real work, muscles sore from learning to survive. This woman was someone new. When she emerged, dressed in her one clean dress, Caleb was on the porch, giving her privacy. She joined him, her damp hair twisted up properly for the first time in memory. "Feel better?" he asked, not looking at her. "Like a new person." She settled beside him, careful to maintain proper distance. "Thank you. No need for thanks. Should have thought of it sooner." They sat quietly, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The night sounds of the desert rose around them. Crickets, a distant owl, the rustle of small creatures in the brush. "I've been thinking," Caleb said eventually. "If you're going to stay longer, you need proper clothes. That dress won't last much more hard work. And you need boots that fit. I can't afford—" "Wages," he interrupted. "Should have discussed it before. Can't pay much, but room, board, and a small wage. Enough for necessities." Pride warred with practicality. "I haven't earned—" "Stop." His voice was firm. "You've more than earned it. Place runs smoother with 2 people. I'm eating better. House is cleaner. Books make sense for the first time. Fair wage for fair work." Before she could respond, he stood abruptly. "I'm turning in. Long day tomorrow. Need to move the cattle to better grass." She sat alone on the porch, emotions churning. In Silver Creek, she'd been trapped by debt and duty. Here, she was earning her own way, making choices that were entirely hers. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The next morning brought a trip to the nearest trading post, a day's ride to the east. Eliza wore her cleanest dress and tried to look respectable, though she knew the sun had marked her as clearly as any brand. The trading post was a rough affair. Logs and adobe, smelling of leather and tobacco. The proprietor, a grizzled man named Josiah Briggs, looked her over with curious eyes but asked no questions when Caleb introduced her as his bookkeeper. She bought 2 simple work dresses, sturdy boots that actually fit, and a proper hat to shield her from the sun. When she hesitated over the cost, Caleb reminded her it was her wages. Earned fair. The independence of purchasing her own necessities with money she'd worked for brought unexpected tears to her eyes. On the ride home, packages tied behind their saddles. They talked more freely than usual. Perhaps it was the change of scene or the successful trip, but conversation flowed easier. You never asked why bookkeeper instead of housekeeper, Eliza observed. Bookkeeper gets more respect, less questions too. You're protecting my reputation? He snorted. What reputation? We're both outcasts here, but no sense inviting trouble. Let people think what they want, long as they think it at a distance. That night, in her new nightgown, plain but clean and properly fitting, Eliza lay awake thinking about the strange turns her life had taken. A month ago, she'd been running for her life, sleeping in the dirt, certain each day would be her last. Now she had work, wages, a roof over her head, and something she hadn't expected, a friend. For that's what Caleb had become, she realized. Despite the propriety they maintained, the careful distances, they'd developed an understanding. He respected her boundaries without question, valued her contribution without condescension, and offered protection without possession. The next evening, as they worked on expanding the garden plot, Eliza found herself humming, the first music she'd made since Thomas died. She stopped, embarrassed, but Caleb said, "Don't stop. It's nice. Place has been too quiet too long." So she hummed while they worked, old hymns and folk songs from her childhood. When full dark drove them inside, she felt lighter somehow, as if music had loosened something knotted inside her chest. They were washing up for supper when it happened. She reached for the soap at the same moment he did, their hands brushing. Both jerked back as if burned, then laughed at their reaction. "We're acting like schoolchildren," Eliza said, still laughing. "Suppose we are." But his smile was soft as he handed her the soap, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. They were sitting closer on the porch that evening, she realized. Still proper distance, but less careful space. The silence between them had changed too, from cautious to comfortable, weighted with things unsaid but understood. "I haven't bathed in months," she said suddenly, then gasped, appalled. "I don't know why I said that." Caleb turned to look at her, eyebrow raised. "You bathed yesterday." "No, I mean, before, on the trail, running. I must have looked like—" She couldn't finish, mortification flooding through her, like someone surviving against all odds. He finished quietly. "Nothing shameful in that." "I was so filthy, like an animal." "You were alive. That's all that mattered." He paused, then added so softly she almost missed it. "Still all that matters." The weight of those words settled between them. Eliza felt her cheeks burn, grateful for the darkness that hid her expression. Something was shifting between them, slow as seasons turning, but just as inevitable. "Caleb," she began, not sure what she meant to say. "Time for sleep," he said, standing abruptly. "Long day tomorrow." But as he passed her chair, his hand briefly touched her shoulder, the first deliberate contact he'd initiated. The warmth of it stayed with her long after he'd gone inside. A promise or a question she wasn't yet ready to answer. The peace shattered on a blazing afternoon in late June. Eliza was hanging laundry when she saw the dust cloud on the eastern horizon. Too large for neighbors, too purposeful for drifters. Her blood turned to ice water as she counted the riders. 5 men, moving with the steady pace of hunters who knew their quarry was cornered. "Caleb," she called, her voice carefully level. He emerged from the barn, took one look at her face, then followed her gaze to the approaching riders. "Inside," he said quietly. "Get the Winchester from the bedroom and the ammunition from the high shelf." They had perhaps 10 minutes before the riders arrived. Eliza's hands shook as she gathered the weapons, her mind racing through possibilities. Had they tracked her here? How? She'd been so careful. Caleb was loading his Colt when she returned. "Could be nothing," he said, but his eyes said otherwise. "Could be they're just passing through." With 5 men riding in formation, Eliza positioned herself by the window, rifle ready. "They're bounty men, has to be." "Then we give them no reason to think you're here. You're my bookkeeper, been working for me 2 months. Your name is—" He paused, thinking, "Elizabeth Morrison." "My cousin from Kansas." "Morrison? Common enough name, and family explains why you're here without—" He gestured vaguely, unable to finish the thought about propriety. The riders were close enough now to make out details. Hard men all, armed heavy, with the look of those who made their living on others' misfortune. The lead rider, a thick-set man with a gray-shot beard, raised his hand in greeting as they entered the yard. "Stay inside," Caleb murmured, then stepped onto the porch, rifle casual in his hands but ready. "Afternoon, gentlemen. Something I can help you with?" "Afternoon," the leader replied, his eyes scanning the property with professional interest. "Name's Jake Thornton. These are my associates. We're looking for someone might have passed this way." "Lot of people passed through. Anyone in particular?" Thornton reached into his vest, pulled out a folded paper. Even from inside, Eliza could see it was a wanted poster. Her wanted poster. Woman named Eliza Carter. Widow, about 25, dark hair, wanted for theft and fraud back in Silver Creek. "Theft and fraud?" Caleb's voice was mild. "Doesn't sound like widow trouble. Woman ran out on lawful debts. Took property weren't hers. Making an example needs to be made." Thornton's smile was cold. "There's $500 for information leading to her capture." "500?" Caleb whistled low. "Must be some serious debts." "Serious enough." Thornton's eyes never stopped moving, noting the improvements to the property, the woman's clothing on the line. "You seen anyone matching that description?" "Can't say I have, but then I keep to myself mostly." One of the other riders, younger with a mean cast to his features, spoke up. "That's woman's washing hanging there." "Good eye," Caleb said easily. "My cousin helps with the books and such. She's inside if you need to speak with her." Eliza's heart hammered as the men exchanged glances. If they insisted on seeing her, "Might be we should," Thornton said slowly. "Just to be thorough." Caleb shrugged. "Elizabeth, come on out. These gentlemen have some questions." She took a deep breath, set the rifle aside, and stepped onto the porch. The key was to be someone else entirely. Not the frightened widow who'd fled Silver Creek, but a competent woman with every right to be here. "Gentlemen," she said, nodding politely but not smiling. She kept her hands visible but relaxed, her posture confident. Thornton studied her carefully. "You're Morrison's cousin?" "Second cousin, actually, from Lawrence." She let a hint of Kansas flatness creep into her voice. "Is there some trouble? These men are looking for a woman ran out on debts." Caleb explained, showing her picture around. Thornton handed her the poster. Eliza forced herself to look at it with mild interest, though seeing her own name in print made her stomach churn. It was a poor likeness, thankfully drawn from memory by someone who'd barely known her. "She's pretty," Eliza observed, handing it back. "Though she looks frightened. What did she do?" "Like I said, ran out on lawful debts. Took property too." Thornton's eyes narrowed. "You been here long? Miss Morrison?" 2 months now. Came out after my father passed. Caleb offered me work." She met his gaze steadily. "Is this woman dangerous? Should we be concerned?" The younger rider laughed unpleasantly. "Not dangerous, just slippery. But we'll find her. Always do." "I'm sure you will." Eliza said. Would you gentlemen care for some water? It's a hot day for riding. It was a calculated risk, but offering hospitality would be the natural thing to do. Thornton considered, then shook his head. Appreciate it. Ma'am, but we need to keep moving. Trail's getting cold. He touched his hat. Morrison. Miss Morrison. You see anyone matching that description? You send word to Silver Creek. $500 is considerable money. That it is, Caleb agreed. I'll keep my eyes open. The riders wheeled their horses, but the younger one looked back. Funny thing, Miss Morrison, you favor that picture a mite, around the eyes. Eliza's blood froze, but she forced a laugh. Do I? How unfortunate for me. I'd hate to be mistaken for a criminal. Indeed, Thornton said, his voice thoughtful. Well, good day to you both. They watched the riders leave, dust settling in their wake. Only when they were specks on the horizon did Eliza allow herself to breathe properly. Inside, Caleb said tersely. In the house. Reaction hit her. She sank into a chair, shaking. They know. That young one suspects. At least, maybe. Caleb paced the room like a caged cat. But suspicion isn't proof. And they're bounty hunters, not law. They need you alive and identifiable to collect. They'll be back. Probably. He stopped pacing, looked at her intently. Question is, what do you want to do about it? I should leave. Tonight. Lead them away from here. That's one option. His voice was carefully neutral. You run again. Keep running. Maybe they catch you. Maybe they don't. What's the other option? We fight. He said it simply, as if suggesting they repair the fence. This is my land. You're under my protection. They want to take you. They go through me. You can't. Caleb, these men are killers. I won't have your blood on my conscience. And I won't have yours on mine. He pulled out a chair, sat across from her. Eliza, and I know that's your real name, known it for weeks. You think I pulled you from that storm just to hand you over to men like that? This isn't your fight, isn't it? His green eyes held hers. I told you I left the cavalry because of orders I wouldn't follow. You know what those orders were? To return escaped slaves to their owners, to drag women and children from their homes, to be the instrument of someone else's cruelty. He leaned forward. I failed those people then. I won't fail you now. Tears burned her eyes. It's not the same, isn't it? You're running from men who want to own you, use you, make an example of you. Only difference is the legal papers they carry. A sound outside made them both freeze horses returning. Caleb moved to the window, then relaxed slightly. It's the Hawthorne boys, coming fast. The brothers pulled up in a cloud of dust, faces grim. Morrison, the elder, Samuel, called. Those riders stop here? They did. Why? They're making camp about 5 miles east. Sent their Mexican tracker circling back on foot. Pablo spotted him. Came to warn us. Caleb cursed under his breath. They're watching the place. Looks like. Want some help running them off? No. Caleb's voice was firm. This is my problem. But I appreciate the warning. Samuel looked like he wanted to argue, but his brother touched his arm. Your business, Morrison. But if shooting starts, we'll hear it, and we'll come. After they left, Caleb began preparing with military efficiency. Weapons cleaned and loaded, ammunition distributed, sightlines checked. Eliza helped, her fear crystallizing into determination. They'll wait for dark, Caleb said. Try to catch us sleeping, or they'll attempt to separate us. Get you alone. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, they took positions. Caleb at the front window, Eliza covering the back. The house, built with defense in mind, offered good coverage. I'm sorry, Eliza whispered in the gathering darkness, for bringing this to your door. Don't, came his reply. I made my choice the day I brought you here. Don't insult me by apologizing for it. Night fell like a curtain. Every sound became suspicious. Was that the wind? Or footsteps? An animal? Or a man moving through brush? Eliza's hands cramped from gripping the rifle. Her eyes strained from peering into darkness. Then, just as the moon rose, it began. The first shot shattered the kitchen window, spraying glass across the floor. Eliza dropped flat, her training over these past weeks taking over. Caleb returned fire immediately, the boom of his rifle deafening in the enclosed space. "Stay down!" he shouted, though she was already crawling toward better cover. More shots came from multiple directions. They'd surrounded the house. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like deadly fireflies. Eliza spotted movement near the chicken coop and fired, hearing a curse as her bullet found its mark. "Good shot," Caleb called, then grunted as return fire splintered the door frame inches from his head. The siege continued, hunters testing their defenses, looking for weakness. But the house held strong, its thick adobe walls stopping bullets that would have punched through wood. Eliza's fear transformed into something cold and focused. She would not be taken, would not let them drag her back to humiliation and servitude. A lull fell, heavy with threat. Then Thornton's voice carried across the yard. "Morrison, no need for anyone to die tonight. Send the woman out, and we ride away peaceful-like." "Counteroffer," Caleb called back. "You ride away now, and I don't put a bullet in you. $500 says otherwise, and there's 5 of us. 2 of you." "4," Eliza corrected, loud enough to carry. "I winged one by the coop." Cursing from that direction confirmed her count. Caleb glanced at her, a fierce pride in his eyes that made her heart skip despite their circumstances. "You're good men." Caleb tried again. "Is bounty money worth dying for? Because I promise you, you try to take her. Some of you won't ride away." Big talk from a man outnumbered. As if in response, rifle fire erupted from the ridge behind the house, not at them, but at the hunters' positions. The Hawthorne brothers, true to their word. The tide shifted as the hunters found themselves caught between defenders. In the chaos, Eliza saw a figure rushing the back door, the young rider who'd recognized her. She fired, but he kept coming, slamming into the door with his shoulder. The bar held, but barely. "Caleb!" He spun, fired through the door. A scream and the sound of a body falling. But more were coming. They'd decided on a desperate rush. The front door exploded inward as 2 men hit it together. Caleb met them with his Colt, dropping one, but the other crashed into him. They went down in a tangle of limbs, fighting for the gun. Eliza couldn't get a clear shot. Then she saw Thornton himself coming through the back door, the young rider's sacrifice having damaged the bar. Their eyes met across the room, hunter and prey, but she no longer knew which was which. She pulled the trigger. The rifle clicked empty. Thornton smiled. "Advancing. Out of ammunition. Mrs. Carter? How unfortunate." But Eliza had learned more than shooting these past months. As he reached for her, she swung the rifle like a club, catching him across the jaw. He staggered, and she drew the Derringer from her pocket, the little gun Caleb had never asked her to surrender. "Not quite," she said, and fired. Thornton clutched his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Behind her, she heard the crash of furniture. Caleb still fighting. No time to help. Another hunter appeared in the doorway. She fired again. The Derringer's second and last shot, sending him diving for cover. Then Caleb was beside her, blood on his face but his guns in his hands. "The Hawthorns have them flanked," he panted. "They'll run now." Indeed, shouts outside suggested retreat. Thornton backed toward the door, still clutching his shoulder. "This isn't over," he snarled. "That bounty stands. Others will come. Let them," Eliza heard herself say. "I'm done running." They watched from the shattered windows as the surviving hunters collected their wounded and fled. The Hawthorne brothers' rifles encouraging their departure. When the dust settled, 2 bodies remained in the yard, men who'd chosen bounty over breath. Samuel Hawthorne appeared at the door, rifle ready. "Everyone whole in here?" "More or less," Caleb said, wiping blood from a cut above his eye. "We owe you. No owing between neighbors." Samuel's weathered face was grim. "Though you might want to explain why bounty hunters are shooting up the valley." Eliza stepped forward. "It's my fault. I'm wanted in Silver Creek for debts I didn't create and couldn't pay. They want to make an example." Samuel studied her, then shrugged. "Silver Creek's a long way off. Their law doesn't run here." He looked at his brother. "Right, Pete." "Don't know nothing about any widow from Silver Creek." Pete agreed. "Just know Morrison and his bookkeeper fought off some bandits tonight." After they left, promising to help deal with the bodies come morning, Eliza and Caleb surveyed the damage. Windows broken, furniture destroyed, bullet holes decorating walls like deadly flowers. But they were alive. "Sit," Eliza commanded, finding the medical supplies. "That cut needs tending." He submitted to her ministrations, wincing as she cleaned the wound. This close, she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of violence, even in victory. "I'm sorry," she began. "If you apologize one more time, I'll put you over my knee." The words slipped out, and both froze at the implication. "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant." Her hands were gentle on his face, cleaning away blood and dirt. "But I am sorry. You built something good here, and I brought destruction to it." "You brought life to it," he corrected softly. "Place was just walls and work before. Now it's—" "What?" He caught her hand, stilling its movement. "Home." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Eliza found herself leaning closer, drawn by something stronger than propriety or fear. "They'll send word back," she said. "Others will come. Maybe, but word will spread here too. The Hawthorns will talk. Others will listen. This valley protects its own. I'm not one of your own. Aren't you?" His thumb traced her knuckles, leaving trails of warmth. "You've worked this land, bled for it now. That makes you one of us. If you want to be. What I want—" She paused, overwhelmed by the truth of it. "What I want is to stop being afraid, to build something instead of running from ruins. Then stay. We'll face whatever comes together." Dawn was breaking, painting the damaged room in soft gold. Through the broken window, she could see the land she'd come to love, harsh but honest, demanding but fair, like the man beside her. Together, she agreed. The next days were a whirlwind of repairs and revelations. Word spread quickly through the sparse population of the valley. Morrison's place had been attacked by bounty hunters, and the community had stood together. Men arrived to help fix the damage, their wives bringing food and quiet acceptance. Mrs. Hawthorne, Samuel's wife, took Eliza aside while the men worked. "Heard you're a widow," she said bluntly. "Running from trouble not of your making." "Yes, ma'am." "Well, we've all got pasts out here. What matters is what you do going forward." She paused. "Caleb's a good man. Bit broken from the war, but good nonetheless. You could do worse." Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks. "We're not— that is, I work for him." Mrs. Hawthorne's knowing smile said volumes. "Of course. Dear, just remember, life's short out here." Too short for excessive propriety. That evening, as they ate dinner in their patched-up kitchen, Caleb seemed unusually quiet. Finally, he set down his fork. "I need to tell you something." Eliza's stomach clenched. "Oh? My name, it's not really Morrison." He met her eyes. "It's Caleb Morgan Hartley, Captain Caleb Hartley, formerly of the 7th Cavalry." Hartley. The name was familiar. "There was a scandal, an officer who refused orders, who refused to massacre civilians, who testified against his commanding officer, who was court-martialed for insubordination and conduct unbecoming." His voice was bitter. "Conduct unbecoming being refusing to murder women and children. But you were right. Right doesn't matter when you break the chain of command. I kept my commission, barely, but my career was over. So I came here, changed my name enough to avoid immediate recognition. Tried to build something clean." Eliza reached across the table, covered his hand with hers. "You were brave." "Was I? I followed orders for years before that. How many innocents died because I didn't speak up sooner? You can't change the past, but you changed course when it mattered. That's more than most do." He turned his hand, interlacing their fingers. "Like you." Like me, you could have stayed in Silver Creek, accepted what they wanted to do to you. Instead, you ran, fought, survived. With help. She squeezed his fingers. A stranger who pulled me from a storm. Best decision I ever made. They sat in the gathering darkness, hands linked across the table. Two outcasts who'd found shelter in each other. Outside, nightbirds called and coyotes sang their ancient songs. But inside, in their battered but unbroken home, there was peace. Stay, Caleb said suddenly. Not as my employee, not as someone hiding. Stay as whatever you want to be. What are you asking? I'm asking badly. He admitted, but I'm asking for a chance to court you proper, to build something together that's more than just survival. Eliza thought of all the reasons to say no, the danger still lurking, the impropriety, the scars they both carried. Then she thought of the alternative, a life of running, of being alone, of never taking another chance on trust. Yes, she said simply. Spring returned to the valley like a promise kept. The desert bloomed with unexpected color, purple sage, yellow brittlebush, the shocking pink of prickly pear flowers. Eliza stood on the porch of the now completed house, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. A year had passed since she'd stumbled into this place, desperate and broken. Now, she barely recognized the woman she'd been. Her hands, once soft from town living, bore calluses from honest work. Her skin had darkened to honey brown, laugh lines appearing at the corners of her eyes. She wore practical clothing now, split skirts for riding, sturdy boots, a man's shirt tucked in neat. But it was the change inside that mattered most. The fear that had driven her for so long had faded, replaced by something she'd never expected to feel again. Hope. Coffee's ready, Caleb called from inside. She smiled, turning back to the house that had become home. They'd rebuilt it stronger after the attack, adding rooms, reinforcing walls. The Hawthorne brothers had helped, along with other neighbors who decided the Hartleys, for that's what they were called now, though no ceremony had made it official yet, were worth protecting. Inside, Caleb stood by the stove, pouring coffee into 2 cups. The morning light caught the silver threading through his dark hair, the lines around his eyes deeper but somehow softer than when they'd met. He handed her a cup, their fingers brushing in a touch that still sent warmth through her. Sheriff Williams is coming today, he said. Eliza's stomach tightened. About the investigation? Final report. Samuel says Williams is ready to close it all out. 3 months after the shootout, the territorial sheriff had finally investigated. By then, the story had solidified. Bandits had attacked the ranch, been driven off by the residents and neighbors. The bodies had been buried without identification, their possessions burned. If anyone recognized them as bounty hunters from Silver Creek, they kept quiet. But more importantly, Caleb had written to a lawyer friend from his army days, asking about the legality of the debts. The response had been illuminating without her signature, without her knowledge. Most of Thomas's debts couldn't legally transfer to her. The creditors had been hoping ignorance and intimidation would succeed where law wouldn't. It'll be fine, Caleb assured her, reading her worry. Williams is a practical man. He knows justice and law aren't always the same thing. By noon, Sheriff Williams had come and gone, officially closing the case as self-defense against unknown assailants. He'd looked Eliza in the eye as he'd said it, and she'd seen understanding there. Funny thing, Williams had mentioned casually as he mounted his horse. Got a letter from Silver Creek last week. Seems some creditors there got into trouble for fraudulent claims, trying to collect debts that weren't legal. Made me think, anyone running from that kind of false claim wouldn't really be running from the law, would they? After he left, Eliza felt the last chain of her old life fall away. She was truly free. That evening, as they sat watching the sunset, Caleb cleared his throat. Been thinking, he began. Dangerous habit, she teased, but her heart rate picked up at his serious tone. We've been dancing around this for months now. He turned to face her fully. I told you I wanted to court you proper, but truth is, we've been living as partners already. Working together, building together, fighting together. Caleb, let me finish. He reached into his pocket, pulled out something that caught the dying light. A ring, simple silver with a small turquoise stone. It's not fancy. Had the Navajo silversmith make it, but I hoped. Yes, Eliza said before he could fumble further. Whatever you're asking, yes, he laughed, sudden and bright. You don't even know what I'm asking. Don't I? She took the ring, sliding it onto her finger where it fit perfectly. You're asking if I'll stay forever, if I'll be your wife as I've already been your partner, if I'll take your name that I've already been using, if I'll share your bed as I've already shared your battles. When you put it like that, seems I'm offering you nothing new. You're offering me everything. She moved closer, until she could feel his warmth. A future without fear. A partner who sees me as I am, not as society says I should be. A love built on truth and tested by fire. He kissed her then, there on the porch where so many careful distances had been maintained. It was a kiss that tasted of coffee and promises, of desert dust and coming home. When they parted, both breathing hard, he laughed against her lips. Remember what you told me once, he murmured. About not bathing for months? She groaned, embarrassed even now. Why would you bring that up? Because even then, trail-worn and desperate, covered in dust and fear, you were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. He pulled back to look at her. You were magnificent in your survival, and I knew I'd do anything to keep you safe. Even face down bounty hunters. Even that. He grew serious. I'd do it again. Eliza. All of it. I know. She touched his face, feeling the stubble, the warmth, the solid reality of him. Just as I'd face them all again to stay here, to stay with you. 2 weeks later, they married in the Hawthorne's parlor, with half the valley in attendance. Eliza wore a new blue dress that brought out her eyes, and Caleb had trimmed his hair and worn his best shirt. The circuit preacher performed the ceremony, and if he wondered about the bride's past, he kept it to himself. As they exchanged vows, Eliza thought about the journey that had brought her here, the terror of those first days running, the desperation, the certainty that her life was over. She'd lost everything: husband, home, reputation, safety. But in losing it all, she'd found something infinitely more precious: herself. And in finding herself, she'd found Caleb. I now pronounce you man and wife, the preacher intoned. You may kiss your bride. This kiss was different from their first confidant, claiming a public declaration of private promises. The assembled neighbors cheered, and Mrs. Hawthorne wiped away tears, and somewhere outside, a hawk cried its wild freedom. The reception was held at their ranch, tables set up in the yard where gunfire had once shattered the night. Now it rang with laughter, with fiddle music, with the clink of glasses raised in toast. Eliza danced with her husband, while their friends and neighbors celebrated around them. As the sun set, painting the desert in its daily masterpiece of color, Eliza stood apart for a moment, taking it all in. The house they'd built together, stronger for having been tested. The land that had seemed so harsh but had offered sanctuary. The people who judged her not by her past but by her actions. Caleb appeared at her elbow, handed her a cup of punch. Happy? More than I ever thought possible. Good. He was quiet for a moment, then added, I love you. Eliza Hartley. The name sent a thrill through her. Not Carter, burdened with debt and lies. Not Morrison, the fiction she'd hidden behind, but Hartley chosen freely, earned through trial, worn with pride. And I love you, Caleb Hartley. As the party continued around them, they stood together watching the stars emerge in the vast desert sky. The same stars that had witnessed her desperate flight now blessed her new beginning. Somewhere out there, other desperate souls were running, fleeing their own silver creeks, searching for their own sanctuary. Eliza hoped they'd find it, as she had. No regrets? Caleb asked softly. None, she replied, and meant it. Every step led me here, even the hardest ones, especially those. He agreed. Later, as the guests departed and quiet settled over their ranch, Eliza looked back one last time at the road she'd traveled, from a widow crushed by circumstances beyond her control to a woman who'd claimed her own destiny. From someone defined by society's expectations to someone who'd helped forge a new life in an unforgiving land. The desert had tested her, stripped away everything non-essential, revealed the steel at her core. And in that revelation, she'd found not just survival but love, not just escape but home, not just a hiding place but a life worth living. As she turned to follow her husband into their house, their home, a coyote called in the distance, wild and free. Eliza smiled. She understood that call now, that fierce independence, that refusal to be tamed. But she also understood something the coyote perhaps didn't, that true freedom sometimes meant choosing to stay, choosing to build, choosing to love despite the risks. The door closed behind them, shutting out the night but not the stars. And in the high desert of New Mexico territory, two souls who'd been broken by the world had found in each other the strength to build something new, something lasting, something worth defending. The desert, in its harsh wisdom, had given them its greatest gift, a second chance. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying this tale from, whether you're listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps even somewhere in the American Southwest where our story took place. Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Eliza and Caleb's journey. Did their story of survival and unexpected love touch your heart? Let us know in the comments below.